So story time. Sennheiser invited me to go to the Tullamore factory to check out a mystery headphone. That was supposed to happen earlier this year, back in January. But through all of December, literally for a month long, I was super sick. I was battling pneumonia. And then the last week, I had full body hives, literally covering my entire body. Anyways, the mystery headphone ended up being the HD550, and it's too bad I didn't get to go because this headphone is awesome, and I'm gonna tell you about it today. Now, if you thought all that was TMI, here's more information about our sponsor, headphones.com. Headphones.com is a premier online retailer where you can find every headphone that we're going to talk about today, including the brand new HD550. Now, neither Sennheiser or Headphones is telling me to say anything good or bad here. All thoughts and opinions, like always, are my own. But if you are going to pick it up, I'd recommend picking it up at headphones.com because they have an awesome customer support if you have any questions, 365-day returns, which is insane, and they're just a trustworthy, high-quality store with good products at good prices. Headphones.com, thanks a lot. Now, as far as build and comfort, we just went over this in the 505 first impressions, but here's the too long didn't read. It's a plastic design, but it's so lightweight that it's comfortable anyways. And the one and only misstep that I think they made on this whole design is the same as the 505, and that's no divot in the headband, making the 560S, which is the cheapest in this newest generation of 5 Series headphones, actually the most comfortable because of the divot. But this is still a very comfortable headphone. I think they wanted a more premium headband feeling with this kind of wrapped design rather than the plastic design of the 560. But it's still a mad comfortable headphone, and being Sennheiser, I know it's gonna be reliable, so I feel good about this. Now, when it comes to bass, I've found Sennheiser's bass to always be this really natural, just really pleasing sound, though not all that hard hitting, and that's no different here. Now, if you compare the graphs to something like an HD600, you can actually see that it's got quite a bit more extension than previous legacy headphones, which is impressive and definitely a welcome addition. But compared to some of the competitors, the bass extension is not as crazy and is not as low, though I find the general tuning and tonality and texture of it to be very, very pleasing. Now, you can get a little bit better bass with things like EQ or picking good amp selections. Like, this is a little niche Magni Piety, which if you've never heard of, I'll have a review out relatively soon. And speaking of this is about the most I would spend on an amplifier for this headphone. I actually found this to be really good off of things like a MacBook Pro. I think most modern onboard audio is going to be fine with this thing. This thing sounded honestly great off of just a MacBook Pro. I didn't feel any need to go with a higher end amp, even though I tried them on a couple. There's not really a whole lot of benefit. So your barrier to entry for amplification is actually very low on this headphone, which is great. Now, when it comes to actual bass output, there are a number of other headphones that have stronger bass, including things from Sennheiser's own lineup, like the PC38X is a stronger bass performing. It's a little bit more boosted in the mid bass specifically. Headphones like Sundara and Edition XS have better extension down in the sub bass, and things like the AR5000 have a little bit better bass response overall, in my opinion. Now, something that I do find this to have above all of those other headphones, though, is a naturalness to the bass response. And I don't necessarily think that this just comes down to frequency level. I think that this is a timbre characteristic and just a characteristic of this driver in general, is it sounds really, really natural throughout, especially for timbre. And I think that if you're searching for neutrality, there's an argument for this headphone's bass over the other ones, even though on paper, the other ones look a little bit better. Now, mid-range is a continued strong suit of the 550, and it's been a strong suit of the 5 and 6 line for Sennheiser for this price range. I think that they have the most natural sounding mid-range at this price, the 550 included. And I personally think, after A being the HD600 and the 550 back and forth, the 550 is like neck and neck with that thing. But the fact that it's even competitive with what I consider to be one of the best and greatest vocal headphones of all time says a lot about the mid-range. I think the mid-range here is also really excellent, very natural seeming. Now, actually what I would consider more closely related to the 6 Series, specifically something like an HD600, I find the head presence here to be excellent for mid-range. The vocals come across extremely clear and close and intimate like the 600 series does. This is something that some of the best headphones at this price point don't even do as well. Things like Sundara and Edition XS don't feel as close and as intimate and as full as this headphone does. And you can see that in the frequency response. It's very linear through all of the mid-range. It doesn't have any big hikes or dips in it. It just sounds very full and complete, and that comes across in the audio. But I think something that Sennheiser does very, very well is really making that super in your head, very intimate sound. And that I do think stands above some of the competition here. Now the treble response maintains this thing's naturalness and overall general good characteristics, and I actually like the tuning of it quite a bit. I find it to be relatively well balanced with the rest of the regions. Looking at the graphs, I don't see any big dips or peaks that are really worth worrying about, and in general, I think it's a very well-tuned treble response. Where I think it does fall a little bit behind the competition though, and we'll talk about a few other headphones here in a second, is in its detail retrieval. It is not as detailed or as clear sounding as some of its competitors. Now, some headphones like HD600 and Sundara have things that I would consider to be a little bit sparklier treble. And because the treble is pushed forward a little bit more, and I think on this Sundara, I think the driver is just a little bit faster, they come across a little bit more detailed than this headphone does. And detail retrieval is going to be probably the most notable downside. The details are definitely not bad, but I do think it is the area where the other headphones will pull ahead here. Things like AR5000, things like Sundara, things like HD600. It may be a frequency-based thing, but effectively it does come across more detailed than this headphone does. Now this also offers a slight boost in treble response over the 505. Now the 505 actually has a more linear line for its frequency response, but I actually think that the boost in treble here over that, which isn't significant, but it is a little bit better. I think it's just a more pleasing sound signature. Things sound more lively up top and more lively down low because of that slight reduction in the ear gain area. So effectively, I think that this is a bit more of a vivid headphone than the 505 while still maintaining its overall neutrality, including the treble response, which is what I would consider to be very neutral, just not as detailed and as sparkly as some other treble responses are. But I don't want that to sound like a knock on its good characteristics for its treble response. The treble response is very well tuned. It's clear of any shininess or harshness. It's actually a really pleasing and enjoyable and actually kind of smooth treble to listen to, especially if you pair it with a smoother amp like a Piety. All that being said, a lot of this comes up to preference here, but there is one area where I think a slightly brighter treble response leads to better technical performance, and that's going to be in sound staging, because all of the previous headphones mentioned, except for the HD600, so things like the AR5000, things like the Sundara and Edition XS, and even Sennheiser's own PC38X, all have wider sound staging than this does. This goes into like kind of a 3-blob soundstage where it's got the center vocalist, and that is super tight and really well defined, and it's got great imaging between the ears. And then it's got sounds here and sounds here, but it doesn't have a lot of forward or backward depth, and it doesn't really extend as far out as some of its planar competitors. So the sound staging performance here could quite honestly be a little bit better. However, I don't know if they'd be able to get that while maintaining the full neutrality throughout the entire frequency response like they have. I think they would have to sacrifice a bit of that to get better sound staging, and I don't really think that that's the point of this headphone. It's still got good enough sound staging and good enough imaging to do things like gaming and movies and sound really complete and full there and have a good experience. But I think that on the edge cases of sound staging compared to competitors, it falls a little bit behind. But headphones at this price can't win every battle, and all those headphones I mentioned, this beats it in some other areas. Now, Sennheiser has always given me this kind of warm and fuzzy feeling, and this is no different with this headphone. This is like a very comfortable sweater that you're just used to wearing. And I find that to be very pleasing. Now they're getting technically better also, and they're filling some of the gaps that they previously had, and they're improving technically, but I think that they're also doing a really good job of maintaining what they are good at, though there are so many headphones that do a lot of the same thing. And that kind of brings me into my buying advice here. When it comes to this line, they have the 569, the 599, the 560S, the 505, and now the 550. I think that the 550 is the best of the 5 line, period. And since the newer generation, like the 560, 550, and 505 are all sort of close in price, it'd probably be the one I would recommend picking up, unless you are a huge stickler for finding the most comfortable headphone. I think that's going to be the 560S. So if you're into sound, I'd buy the 550. If you're into comfort, I'd buy the 560. And there's an argument for the 505 being a little bit more linear through its frequency response, but I think that you'll find that the slight coloration of the 550 is a little bit more pleasing and engaging while still maintaining the same picture. Like if you listen to the 505 and the 550 back and forth, they seem like very, very, very similar headphones because they are. But on the 550, everything just seems to have a little bit more life to it. So that's the one I would pick. All right, thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next video.